Hi there. Welcome to Hushed History Channel. Tonight, we're stepping into the worn leather boots of a medieval doctor in the year 1348. You can smell the chamber pot emptying from the window above. Hear the church bells calling the faithful to morning prayer, and feel the scratch of your woolen robe against skin that hasn't seen a proper bath in weeks. Fair warning. You probably won't survive past 40 if you keep touching plague victims with your bare hands. But hey, at least you'll die knowing you tried to balance someone's phlegm. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Drop it in the comments below. Alright, let's begin the story. The cock crows somewhere in the darkness beyond your shuttered window, and your eyes snap open. It's maybe 4 in the morning, though you can't be certain. Mechanical clocks are still a luxury reserved for cathedral towers and the wealthiest merchants. You've trained yourself to wake with the first birds, because in your profession, the difference between arriving early and arriving late might mean the difference between a patient's survival and their soul departing for judgment. You swing your legs over the edge of your straw mattress, feeling the cold stone floor through the gaps in the rush matting. The first thing you do, before prayers, before breaking your fast, before even emptying your bladder, is examine your own urine. This isn't some quirky morning ritual. It's professional necessity. You reach for the glass flask you filled last night, holding it up to the faint moonlight streaming through the cracks in your shutters. The color tells you everything. Too pale, and your phlegm is excessive. Too dark, and black bile dominates. That golden amber shade. Perfect balance of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Medieval medical theory, which you've spent years mastering at the University of Paris, revolves entirely around these bodily fluids. Historians still argue whether medieval doctors truly believed in this system or simply used it as a convenient framework for organizing symptoms. But you're a true believer, checking your piss like a modern person might check their smartphone. You swirl the flask gently, watching for sediment. Your master taught you to look for clouds, particles, and even tiny bubbles that might indicate everything from kidney stones to demonic possession. Yes, you read that correctly. Sometimes evil spirits manifest in urine. It's Tuesday, after all, and everyone knows demons are particularly active on Tuesdays when Mars rules the heavens. The church bells begin their morning song, calling the faithful to Lord, so you mutter a quick pater noster while pulling on your long physician's robe, the one that marks you as a learned man, distinct from those butcher surgeons and their blood-stained aprons. The robe is black wool, hot in summer and barely adequate in winter, but it commands respect. More importantly, it hides the fact that you're wearing the same linen undergarments you've had on for a week. Your stomach growls, reminding you that last night's dinner of barley pottage and small ale feels like a distant memory. But first, you must complete your morning humoral check. You press 2 fingers to your neck, feeling for your pulse. Too fast might indicate an excess of hot humors. Too slow suggests cold. Moist phlegm has taken dominance. Medieval physicians didn't count beats per minute. That's still centuries away. Instead, you're feeling for quality. Is it bounding like a gazelle, slithering like a serpent, musical like a lute string? Here's something most people don't realize. Medieval doctors were obsessed with music theory. The University of Bologna actually required physicians to study musical proportions because they believed the human body operated on harmonic principles. A discordant pulse meant illness, while a harmonious rhythm indicated health. You hum a few notes, trying to match your pulse's rhythm. It's slightly sharp. Probably need to bleed yourself later. You descend the narrow stairs, each wooden step creaking a complaint that echoes through your modest townhouse. The building serves triple duty: living quarters above, consultation room at street level, and a dank cellar where you store medicinal ingredients that really shouldn't see daylight. As you enter the main room, you're greeted by a sight that would make modern medical professionals faint. Your breakfast companion is already here, sharpening his razors by the fire. Meet Guillaume the barber surgeon, your professional frenemy and occasional drinking partner. While you spent 7 years at university learning to read Galen in Latin and calculate astrological charts, Guillaume learned his trade through a 3-year apprenticeship that involved holding down screaming patients while his master sawed through bones. You diagnose, he cuts. You prescribe, he bleeds. You philosophize about humoral imbalances. He yanks out rotten teeth with pliers that he also uses to trim beards. Morning, learned doctor. Guillaume grunts, not looking up from his whetstone. Another day of charging gold coins to tell people they're dying of Saturn's influence. There's no real malice in it, just the casual rivalry between book learning and practical skill that defines medieval medicine. You both know the truth. Neither of you can function without the other. The guild laws are crystal clear on this. Physicians like you cannot shed blood or perform manual operations. That's beneath your dignity as a university man. Meanwhile, barber surgeons cannot prescribe internal medicines or make official diagnoses. It's a system that ensures everyone gets paid and patients get thoroughly confused. You settle onto a bench across from him, and his apprentice, a pimply boy of perhaps 14, scrambles to serve breakfast. It's the standard fare: dark bread that could double as a weapon, weak ale that's safer than water, and a chunk of cheese hard enough to crack teeth. Guillaume slides over a small pot of honey, a luxury that speaks to yesterday's successful amputation of a merchant's gangrenous toe. Split the fee with you fair and square, he says, producing 2 silver coins. This is the part historians often miss: the strange economics of medieval medicine. You might have spent years studying the classics, but Guillaume probably makes more money. Surgery, being manual labor, was paradoxically more lucrative than intellectual diagnosis. A mainstream historical fact: barber surgeons in medieval London could charge up to a month's wages for a skilled craftsman just to remove a bladder stone. You, meanwhile, might spend hours calculating a patient's horoscope for a few pennies. The conversation turns, as it always does over breakfast, to yesterday's cases. Guillaume describes extracting a tooth from a baker's wife. Came out black as coal, roots like tree branches, while you share your triumph of correctly predicting a monk's fever would break at sunset, based on lunar calculations. He rolls his eyes at your astrological precision, but you notice he's discreetly taking notes. Even barber surgeons know better than to completely ignore the stars. Speaking of which, Guillaume says through a mouthful of bread, the abbot sent word. Wants you to examine Brother Francis again. Says the holy water isn't working. You suppress a groan. Brother Francis has been dying monthly for 3 years now, each time with symptoms that mysteriously align with whatever saint's day is approaching. Last month, it was Saint Blaise's throat blessing, so naturally Francis developed a terrible cough. This month, with Saint Valentine's feast approaching, you'd bet your best leech jar that he's developed heart palpitations. The apprentice boy, meanwhile, is practicing his bloodletting technique on a leather dummy filled with pig's blood. Every few minutes, a spray of crimson shoots across the room, and Ghilam cuffs him upside the head. "Gently, you oaf. You're opening a vein, not butchering a hog." This is medical education, medieval style, learning by doing, mistakes measured in bloodstains. Here's a quirky detail that might surprise you. Barber surgeons were required by law to hang bloody bandages outside their shops as advertising. The red and white striped pole that modern barbers use, that's a sanitized version of medieval marketing. The red represented arterial blood, the white meant bandages, and the pole itself symbolized the stick patients gripped while being bled. Ghilam's shop down the street probably looks like a scene from a horror show, with yesterday's surgical rags fluttering in the breeze like the world's goriest bunting. The morning sun finally breaks through the narrow gap between buildings as you step into the street, and immediately you're assaulted by the cacophony of medical commerce every Tuesday and Friday. The square near St. Martin's Church transforms into what you might generously call a healing marketplace, though circus of medical chaos would be more accurate. You need supplies for the week ahead, but navigating this maze of quacks, legitimate dealers, and outright charlatans requires the diplomatic skills of a merchant prince and the skepticism of a temple money changer. "Dragon's blood, fresh from the Orient," screams a vendor, whose stall reeks suspiciously of pig fat mixed with red ochre. You know actual dragon's blood, the resin from the dracena tree, when you see it, and this definitely isn't it. But the crowd of housewives and servants doesn't care. They're already pushing forward, coins clutched in sweaty palms, desperate for this miracle cure that supposedly stops bleeding, fixes loose teeth, and prevents your husband from visiting the brothels. The last claim is new. Last week, the same vendor swore it only cured gout. You weave through the throng, your physician's robe parting the crowd like Moses at the Red Sea. Professional courtesy, fear, or perhaps just the assumption that you might be carrying something contagious. Either way, it works. Your first stop is Mordecai the Jew's stall, one of the few vendors you actually trust. Jewish merchants dominated the medical trade for good reason. They could read Arabic medical texts that contain knowledge lost to Christian Europe for centuries. Mordecai greets you with a knowing nod and produces a small vial from beneath his counter. "Theriac of Andromachus," he whispers, as if sharing state secrets. 64 ingredients, aged properly in honey for 6 years. The price he names would feed a peasant family for a month, but you pay it without haggling. Real theriac, not the fake versions made with pepper and clay, is worth its weight in silver. Originally invented as an antidote to poison, medieval doctors prescribed it for everything from plague to melancholy. Historians still argue whether it actually worked or if the opium mixed into most recipes just made patients stop complaining. 3 stalls down, you encounter a sight that makes your university-trained mind reel. A woman selling powdered unicorn horn for virgins' diseases and moon madness. The crowd around her includes several well-dressed merchants' wives, each clutching purses heavy with coin. You edge closer and nearly laugh aloud. It's clearly just ground narwhal tusk, probably acquired from Norse traders. But here's the thing, you'll likely buy some anyway. Not because you believe it's really unicorn horn, but because the placebo effect works, whether you call it that or not. Your patients expect unicorn horn for certain ailments, and sometimes meeting expectations is half the cure. The real entertainment starts when you spot 2 rival vendors nearly coming to blows over who sells the most authentic mummy powder. Yes, you heard that correctly. Ground-up Egyptian mummies were a hot medieval pharmaceutical. The logic went something like this. Ancient Egyptians preserved bodies for the afterlife. Therefore, that preservation power could transfer to living patients, or never mind that most mummy powder was actually just dried pitch mixed with random bones from the local cemetery. The vendors are now shouting increasingly wild claims. Mine comes from a pharaoh's physician. Well, mine's from a high priest of Ra. You discreetly purchase a small amount from a third vendor who's smart enough to keep quiet about his sources. But the marketplace isn't all fraud and wishful thinking. You stock up on legitimate supplies too. Dried herbs from the monastery gardens, where monks have been perfecting cultivation for centuries. Willow bark for fevers, which actually contains salicin, though you won't know that name for another 500 years. Poppy seeds for pain relief. Carefully measured, because everyone knows the difference between medicine and poison is just dosage. Historians often underestimate how much medieval doctors got right by accident, stumbling onto effective treatments through centuries of trial and error. A commotion erupts near the fountain as the city guards arrive to arrest an unlicensed tooth puller. He'd been performing extractions without guild membership, a serious crime punishable by pillory or worse. The man protests that he's been pulling teeth for 20 years, but the law is clear. No guild badge, no practice. You watch with mixed feelings as they drag him away. On one hand, unlicensed practitioners undercut legitimate doctors' fees. On the other, he probably had more practical experience than half the guild members who bought their way in. The commotion at the fountain has barely settled when you hear your name called with the kind of urgency that makes your breakfast congeal in your stomach. A young servant boy, breathless and wide-eyed, grabs your sleeve with hands that shake like autumn leaves. "Master physician, my lord merchant Aldrich demands your immediate attendance. He's got the swellings." Those two words, the swellings, hit you like a crossbow bolt. Your mind races through the possibilities, but deep down, you already know. It's been 3 months since the last plague outbreak, and everyone's been holding their breath, pretending the danger passed. You've been telling yourself the same lie. The boy tugs harder, and you follow, your medical bag suddenly feeling heavier than a millstone. Aldrich's house sits on Goldsmith Row, where the wealthy merchants build their homes tall and narrow, reaching toward a heaven while their foundations sink into the same muck as everyone else's. You climb the external staircase, noting how the servants have already started disappearing. A kitchen maid scurries past with her belongings wrapped in a sheet, not even bothering to curtsy. Rats fleeing a sinking ship, except in this case, the rats might actually be the problem. Inside the merchant's bedchamber, the smell hits you first. It's sweet and rotten, like overripe fruit mixed with fear sweat and something else, something wrong. Aldrich lies propped against silk pillows that probably cost more than you make in a year. He's 45, usually ruddy with good living, but now his face has taken on a greyish cast that makes your own skin crawl. And there, on his neck, just below his jaw, sits a swelling the size of a goose egg. "Don't come closer," he croaks, which is rich considering he summoned you here. "Is it?" He can't even say the word. Nobody wants to say plague out loud, as if speaking it might make it real. You set down your bag with deliberate calm, though your pulse hammers like a smithy's anvil. Time to be a doctor. Even if every instinct screams at you to run. You've seen buboes before. Who hasn't? In this year of 1348. But each time feels like the first time. The swelling is hot to the touch. Yes, you touch it. God help you. And Aldrich winces as your fingers probe the edges. It's in the lymph nodes, just where the Greek texts say corruption gathers. You check his other common sites, Armpits, groin, nothing yet, but that means little. The pestilence moves faster than a papal decree. Here's something historians still debate. Did medieval doctors understand contagion? You certainly have ideas about corrupted air and miasmas, but you also notice patterns. Aldrich mentions his warehouse manager died last week of a fever. His wife took ill 3 days ago. The stable boy yesterday. It spreads person to person. That much is obvious, even if you attribute it to aligned stars rather than microscopic organisms. I need to see your urine, you announce, falling back on familiar ritual. Aldrich's servant, one of the few remaining, produces the flask. It's dark as autumn ale and smells like death warmed over. You hold it to the light, swirling it like a vintner with a questionable wine. The sediment swirls in patterns that, according to your training, suggest an excess of corrupted blood and black bile. In reality, his kidneys are probably failing, but you won't have that vocabulary for centuries. You open your medical bag, revealing the tools of your trade. A small knife for bloodletting, though you suspect bleeding a plague patient might be like bailing water from a sinking ship with a thimble. Herbs and powders in carefully labelled vials. Theriac, of course. Ground pearls for the wealthy. Artemisia for drawing out poisons. Your prized possession. A bezoar stone allegedly from the stomach of a Persian goat. Said to neutralize all toxins. You paid 3 months' earnings for it, and you're not entirely convinced it isn't just a polished river rock. What of my stars? Aldrich gasps. Even facing death, a merchant wants his money's worth. You pull out your astrolabe, the brass instrument that marks you as a true physician rather than a hedge witch. After some calculations that are half mathematics and half theatre, you announce that Mars has entered the house of Saturn, which explains the corrupted humours. It's a bad configuration, but Jupiter's beneficent influence might yet prevail if treatment begins immediately. Treatment. That's the joke, isn't it? You know, and medieval medical texts are surprisingly honest about this, that most plague victims die regardless of intervention. Some doctors advocate aggressive bleeding to release the poisoned humours. Others suggest drawing the poison out through the buboes with hot irons. A few radical physicians from Salerno recommend doing nothing but keeping the patient comfortable, which honestly might be the wisest course. You decide on a middle course, aggressive enough to justify your fee, conservative enough to avoid hastening Aldrich's demise. First, you instruct his servant to prepare a poultice of lily root, dried figs, and onions boiled in butter. It won't cure plague, but it might soften the bubo enough to lance later. You're just explaining the finer points of applying hot compresses when footsteps thunder up the stairs and Guillaume bursts through the door, his apprentice trailing behind like a nervous shadow. Heard you had a special case. The barber surgeon pants, already rolling up his sleeves. His eyes fix on Aldrich's swollen neck with professional interest. That's a beauty. Want me to lance it now or wait for it to ripen? The casual way he discusses potentially fatal surgery makes Aldrich whimper into his silk pillows. This is when things take a turn for the genuinely absurd. Guillaume's apprentice, eager to prove himself useful, bustles forward with the bleeding bowl and a jar of leeches. In his haste, he trips over Aldrich's chamber pot, sending its contents splashing across the Turkish rug. The leeches, meanwhile, go flying through the air like slimy little projectiles. One lands on Aldrich's face. Another attaches itself to the priest who's just arrived to perform last rites. A third somehow finds its way down the apprentice's collar, causing him to perform an impromptu dance that would be hilarious if the situation weren't so dire. Get them off, the priest shrieks, slapping at the leech on his tonsured head. You and Ghilam exchange a look, the kind of weary understanding that passes between medical professionals dealing with chaos. While Ghilam wrestles his apprentice into submission, you calmly pluck the leech from Aldrich's cheek. The merchant's eyes have gone wide with a terror that has nothing to do with plague and everything to do with the medical circus currently performing in his bedchamber. Perhaps, you suggest with as much dignity as you can muster, we should start with something less ambitious, but the comedy of errors isn't finished. The apprentice, still dancing from the leech down his shirt, backs into a shelf containing Aldrich's collection of medical curiosities. Glass jars crash to the floor, releasing their contents, preserved two-headed piglets in brine, what appears to be a dried basilisk, actually a ray fish creatively modified by sailors, and, most unfortunately, a jar of live beetles that were supposed to cure impotence. The beetles scatter across the floor with surprising speed, sending the priest scrambling onto a chair like a character from a bad morality play. Here's where medieval medicine gets truly bizarre. Ghilam, completely unfazed by the chaos, announces that this is actually fortuitous. Beetles fleeing a sick room, clear sign the miasma is lifting. He's making this up on the spot, but everyone, including you, nods sagely. Sometimes the appearance of control matters more than actual control, especially when your patient is watching his expensive chamber transform into a scene from Judgment Day. The leeches, at least, are recovered, most of them. Ghilam insists on applying them, but not to the usual spots. Oh no. He's been reading, yes. Barber surgeons could read, contrary to popular belief, about a new technique from Constantinople, where leeches are applied to the buttocks to draw corruption away from vital organs. Aldrich protests weakly, but when you're possibly dying of plague, dignity becomes negotiable. What follows is perhaps the most awkward 10 minutes of your professional career. Aldrich, a man who considers himself equal to minor nobility, lies face down while Ghilam attaches leeches to his pale merchant posterior. The priest continues his prayers from atop the chair, occasionally swatting at imaginary beetles. The apprentice holds the bleeding bowl with shaking hands, trying not to stare at his social better's exposed hindquarters. And you're pretending to consult your astronomical charts while secretly wondering if that university education was worth 7 years of your life. The truly absurd part, and historians still argue whether medieval doctors were genius or just lucky, is that Ghilam's ridiculous leech placement might actually help. Not because it draws out corruption, but because the mild blood loss could theoretically reduce inflammation. Or maybe it's just that Aldrich is so mortified he forgets to panic about dying. Either way, his breathing seems less labored, though that could also be shock. 3 hours later, you stumble out of Aldrich's house with beetle guts on your shoes and leech slime under your fingernails. The merchant will probably survive. Plague moves fast, and if it were going to kill him, he'd already be showing the telltale black fingers. You've prescribed a regimen of theriac, prayer, and keeping those ridiculous buttock leeches applied twice daily. Ghilam stayed behind to train the remaining servant in proper leech husbandry, a skill that poor soul never expected to need. Your next appointment promises to be less dramatic, but potentially more dangerous, at least for your professional reputation. Lord Reginald de Montfort has requested your services for his monthly astrological consultation. The nobility's obsession with medical astrology keeps food on your table, but it also means walking a tightrope between science and prophecy, especially when Mercury is indeed in retrograde and your calculations suggest things your patron won't want to hear. The castle sits on the hill like a stone crown on the city's head, and you climb the winding path with growing unease. Your astronomical charts, tucked safely in your leather satchel, contain calculations that would make any nobleman nervous. Mars conjunct Saturn in the 8th house, the house of death. Jupiter afflicted in the 2nd, financial ruin. And Mercury, that trickster planet, dancing backward through the house of enemies like a court jester with a knife behind his back. Lord Reginald receives you in his solar, a private chamber where tapestries depicting his ancestors' dubious military victories cover stone walls that weep with perpetual damp. He's 62, gout-ridden, and mean as a baited bear. His previous physician mysteriously fell from the castle walls after predicting the Lord would die before Christmas. That was 3 Christmases ago, and Lord Reginald takes particular pleasure in outliving pessimistic prophecies. Well, he barks, before you've even unrolled your charts. What do the stars say about my ventures in Flanders? His wool trade with the Low Countries has made him rich enough to gild his chamber pot, but recent rumours suggest his Flemish partners might be plotting something. You spread your calculations across his oak table, buying time while your mind races through possible interpretations. The mathematical part of medical astrology was actually quite sophisticated. You've spent years learning to calculate planetary positions, chart houses, and determine aspects. Arab astronomers had developed these techniques to a high art, and European physicians eagerly absorbed their knowledge. The problem isn't the math, it's the interpretation. Those threatening planetary positions could mean death, or they could mean metaphorical death, like the end of a business partnership. The art lies in being accurate enough to maintain credibility, while vague enough to avoid execution. My lord, you begin carefully. Mercury's retrograde motion through your house of open enemies suggests communication difficulties with foreign partners. Safe enough. Mercury retrograde always means communication problems. However, the Sun's forthcoming trine to your natal Jupiter indicates that patience will be rewarded with profit. Also safe. Nobody ever complains about predictions of future wealth. But then Lord Reginald leans forward, his piggy eyes narrowing. And what of my health? Speak plainly, physician. Will I live to see another Christmas? Ah, the question you've been dreading. Your calculations clearly show his natal sun severely afflicted by transiting Saturn, in layman's terms. Death is knocking at the door. But remember what happened to your predecessor. This is where you earn your fee. You launch into an elaborate explanation about how Saturn, while traditionally malefic, is actually dignified in Aquarius, which happens to be rising at the time of the next full moon. You weave in references to Ptolemy, Albumassar, and other authorities Lord Reginald has heard of, but never read. You mention that while the superficial reading suggests danger, the deeper hermetic interpretation reveals a transformation rather than a termination. Death of the old self, birth of the new. Very philosophical, very safe. Here's a quirky historical detail. Medieval nobles often kept their own astrologers specifically to double-check their physicians' calculations. Lord Reginald probably has some half-trained monks squirreled away in the tower, ready to verify your work. The trick is to make your calculations so complex, so laden with technical terminology, that even an educated rival would struggle to dispute them. You throw in some Arabic terms for good measure, al-Mubtaz and Hayes, knowing that Lord Reginald associates Arabic with ancient wisdom. But then disaster strikes. In your nervousness, You knock over the inkwell, sending black liquid flowing across your carefully prepared chart. So the ink pools ominously right over the 8th house, the house of death, in Lord Reginald's nativity. The symbolism is so heavy-handed that even a child could read it. The Lord's face goes pale, then red, then an interesting shade of purple that suggests those afflicted planets might be working faster than anticipated. A sign, Lord Reginald roars, spittle flying from his lips. You've marked my death house with black ink. Guards! Your mind races faster than a plague-bearing flea as 2 men-at-arms clatter into the solar, hands already reaching for sword hilts. This is it. You're about to follow your predecessor over the castle walls, all because of clumsy fingers and an overturned inkwell. But desperation breeds inspiration. You don't cower or protest. Instead, you lean forward with sudden intensity, examining the ink stain as if it contains the secrets of the universe. My lord, you breathe. Do you not see? The ink has formed the shape of a crown. You trace your finger through the wet ink, creating something that, if you squint and tilt your head, might possibly resemble royal headgear. Saturn's darkness transforms into sovereignty. This is no death omen. It's a promise of elevation. The guards pause. Lord Reginald squints at the ink blot. You hold your breath, praying to every saint you can remember that nobility's tendency toward wishful thinking will save your neck. A crown, you say? He leans closer, and you quickly elaborate, your university training in rhetoric finally proving useful. The black ink represents the alchemical nigredo, the necessary darkness before transformation into gold. The 8th house, while traditionally associated with death, also governs inheritance and other people's money. Perhaps the king will honor him. Perhaps a rival will die and leave him their lands. It works. It actually works. Lord Reginald's face shifts from murderous to contemplative. Within minutes, he's convinced himself that your accident was divine providence, revealing what careful calculation could not. He dismisses the guards and actually increases your fee, though he does make you swear on holy relics that you won't speak of this vision to his rivals. You leave the castle on shaking legs, clutching a purse heavy with silver and wondering if every medieval physician was part doctor, part confidence artist. The afternoon sun beats down as you make your way to your next appointment, a tooth extraction at the Blacksmith's Guild. This should be straightforward. No plague, no death omens, no beetles or misplaced leeches, just you. Guillaume, who's supposed to meet you there, and a burly smith with a rotten molar. What could possibly go wrong? The guild hall smells of coal smoke and male sweat, a combination that makes your eyes water. Your patient, a master smith named Brutus, whose arms are thicker than your thighs, sits on a sturdy chair, surrounded by his fellow craftsmen. They've been preparing him for the procedure with copious amounts of strong ale, and by the time you arrive, he's singing bawdy songs about a miller's daughter that would make a sailor blush. Guillaume is already there, laying out his tools with the reverence of a priest preparing communion. The extraction pelican, a horrifying instrument that looks like a metal bird's beak, had an unfortunate encounter with a torture device, various sizes of dental keys, which work on the same principle as a corkscrew but with more screaming, and his pride and joy. A new pair of extraction forceps he claims were blessed by a bishop. You suspect the only blessing they received was from the silversmith who overcharged him. Right then, Guillaume announces cheerfully, "Open wide, and let's see the offending tooth." Brutus obliges, revealing a mouth that could serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of never cleaning your teeth. The smell that emerges makes everyone step back. Even Guillaume, who once amputated a gangrenous leg in high summer, looks momentarily green. The rotten molar sits like a black pearl in a setting of inflamed gums. Here's something mainstream historians often mention. Medieval people actually tried to maintain dental hygiene. They used rough cloths, salt, and even primitive toothpicks. But when your diet consists mainly of coarse bread filled with tiny stones from the mill wheel, and sugar is starting to arrive from the east, tooth decay is inevitable. Brutus's molar probably started rotting years ago, but like most people, he waited until the pain became unbearable before seeking help. The extraction begins well enough. Guillaume positions the pelican. You hold Brutus's head steady, and the gathered smiths start an encouraging chant that sounds suspiciously like a drinking song. But ale, even copious amounts of it, is a poor anesthetic. The moment Guillaume begins to apply pressure, Brutus lets out a roar that could probably be heard in France. His massive hand shoots out, catching Guillaume in the chest and sending the barber surgeon flying backward into a table full of ceremonial guild cups. The crash of metal cups still echoes through the guild hall as Guillaume picks himself up, wheezing but determined. Brutus, meanwhile, has gone from roaring drunk to fighting drunk. He's on his feet, fists raised, apparently ready to box his own tooth into submission. The other smiths form a circle, torn between helping and placing bets on whether their brother will knock out the barber surgeon before the tooth comes out. "Hold him," Guillaume gasps. And suddenly, you're in an impromptu wrestling match with a man who shapes iron with his bare hands. Two smiths grab Brutus's arms while you somehow end up clinging to his legs like a theological student who's made poor life choices. The dental pelican goes flying, nearly braining the guildmaster, and somewhere in the chaos, Guillaume's blessed forceps end up in a pitcher of ale. This is when your colleague from the apothecary shop makes his entrance, Master Ambrose, brilliant, ambitious, and catastrophically reckless, bursts through the door carrying a leather satchel that's smoking ominously. "Heard you needed assistance," he shouts over Brutus's continued bellowing. "I've brought my latest experiment." You should explain about Ambrose. While you and Guillaume represent the traditional branches of medieval medicine, Ambrose embodies the dangerous cutting edge. He's been attempting to recreate the legendary Greek fire, convinced it has medical applications. Last month, he nearly burned down his shop trying to distill what he called essence of vitality. The month before, he gave himself mercury poisoning, testing a new cure for melancholy. Historians still argue whether medieval alchemist physicians were proto-scientists or just lucky not to kill themselves more often. "Absolutely not," you and Guillaume say in unison. But Ambrose is already pulling out a vial of something that glows faintly green. "Just a drop on the gums," he insists. "And the patient feels nothing. I tested it on my cat." The fact that he doesn't currently have a cat anymore should be warning enough. But Brutus, still struggling against his restrainers, manages to slur out something that sounds like consent. What happens next will be debated in the guild hall for years. Ambrose uncorks his vial, and the smell that emerges makes the rotten tooth seem like perfume. It's sulfur mixed with something sweet and wrong, like honey that's been cursed by demons. He leans forward with an eyedropper, aims for Brutus's gums, and then, because this is medieval medicine and nothing ever goes to plan, accidentally squirts the entire contents directly onto the blacksmith's tongue. The effect is instantaneous. Brutus's eyes roll back, his body goes rigid, and then he starts speaking in what sounds like ancient Sumerian, or possibly just backwards Latin. Either way, the smiths immediately let go and start making signs against the evil eye. Guillaume crosses himself. You grab your medical bag, searching desperately for something, anything, that might counteract whatever Ambrose just administered. Fascinating, Ambrose exclaims, pulling out a notebook. I theorized it might affect the humoral balance, but this suggests a direct connection to the spiritual essence. Note the glossolalia. Clearly the substance has open channels to the celestial spheres. He's scribbling furiously while Brutus continues his demonic soliloquy, now with added frothing at the mouth. Here's the part where medieval medicine accidentally stumbles onto something real. Ambrose's concoction probably contains some form of belladonna or henbane, plants that actually do have numbing properties, but also cause hallucinations and delirium. The green glow, likely phosphorus, which Ambrose has been extracting from vast quantities of urine he collects from the public latrines. Why phosphorus? Because it glows in the dark, and anything that glows must be medically significant. That's medieval logic for you, the guildmaster, showing more sense than anyone else in the room. Orders buckets of water brought. You and Guillaume start force-feeding Brutus diluted wine to flush out the poison, while Ambrose protests that you're ruining his experiment. The other smiths begin a fervent prayer to Saint Eligius, patron of metalworkers, apparently figuring divine intervention can't make things worse. Miraculously, and it does feel like a miracle, Brutus suddenly stops his babbling. His eyes focus. He looks around the chaos of overturned furniture and spilled ale and asks in a perfectly normal voice, "Did you get the tooth yet?" The rotten molar, it turns out, has fallen out on its own during his thrashing. It lies on the floor like a small, black accusation. Guillaume scoops up the tooth triumphantly, holding it aloft as if it's a holy relic. The smiths cheer. Ambrose sulks about his ruined experiment. And you? You're calculating how much extra you're going to charge for this circus disguised as dentistry. Medieval medicine, where the cure is often worse than the disease. But at least it's never boring. By the time you extract yourself from the guild hall, Ambrose's experimental residue still staining your robe a suspicious green. The cathedral bells are tolling vespers. Your evening appointment promises to be either the simplest or most complex of your day, depending on whether young Lady Marguerite is actually ill or merely possessed by demons. In medieval medicine, that's not a facetious distinction. It's a diagnostic necessity that determines whether you'll be prescribing herbs or calling for the priest. The convent of St. Agnes sits just within the city walls, a grey stone edifice that manages to look both holy and forbidding. You've been summoned by the abbess herself, a formidable woman who once allegedly stared down a Viking raid through sheer force of disapproval. The message was cryptic. Lady Marguerite suffers from fits and visions. Come discreetly. Bring both medicine and holy water. You find the patient in a sparse cell, watched over by 2 nervous novices who jump every time she moves. Lady Marguerite, 15, noble-born, recently committed to the convent by her father after refusing 3 marriage proposals, lies on a simple cot. She's pale as fresh parchment, with the kind of ethereal beauty that medieval poets write bad verses about. She's also completely rigid, eyes rolled back, mumbling in what might be Latin or might be nonsense. The abbess pulls you aside. It started 3 days ago. First the fasting. She claims all food tastes of ash, then the visions. She says the Virgin Mary speaks to her. The abbess's tone suggests skepticism. Yesterday, she began these fits. The younger sisters think it's divine ecstasy. I think it might be something else. The way she says something else makes it clear she's seen enough young noblewomen suddenly develop religious fervor when faced with unwanted marriages. This is your challenge, determining whether Lady Marguerite suffers from a medical condition, demonic possession, divine inspiration, or what a modern physician might recognize as a psychosomatic response to trauma. Medieval medicine had categories for all of these, though the treatments varied wildly. Possession required exorcism. Divine ecstasy required veneration. Medical conditions required treatment. And sometimes, young women just needed someone to actually listen to them. You begin with the standard examination. Her pulse is rapid but regular. No demonic irregularity there. Her urine, collected by the deeply embarrassed novices, is pale but normal. No fever, no swelling of the lymph nodes, no obvious signs of physical disease. But then she starts convulsing, and things get interesting. The fit is dramatic, back arched, limbs rigid, foam at the mouth. The novices immediately drop to their knees, convinced they're witnessing a saint in the making. But you've seen enough cases of what you call suffocation of the womb, what later centuries will call hysteria, and even later centuries will recognize as possibly epilepsy or conversion disorder. To recognize the patterns, the timing is too regular, the movements too controlled. This isn't possession or divinity. It's a young woman whose body has found a way to protest what her voice cannot. Here's where medieval medicine gets surprisingly sophisticated. You don't immediately denounce her as a faker. That would be both cruel and medically unsound. Instead, you employ what might be called therapeutic theatre. You produce your most impressive-looking medical instruments, burn herbs that smell suitably mystical, and begin a treatment that's part medicine, part psychology, and part performance art. The humours are clearly disturbed, you announce, loud enough for everyone to hear, but not by demonic influence. Rather, an excess of black bile has accumulated in the virgin womb, causing these paroxysms. The novices nod sagely, as if they understand what any of that means. You prescribe a regimen of gentle purgatives, warm baths scented with lavender, and, crucially, a diet that includes actual food, rather than the bread and water she's been restricting herself to. But the real treatment happens when you dismiss the novices and speak to Marguerite directly. Her eyes, you notice, track your movements even during her unconscious fits. "My lady," you say quietly, "the body speaks what the mouth cannot. Perhaps if you could tell me what truly ails you." And suddenly, miraculously, the fit stops. She sits up, tears streaming down her face, and the whole story pours out. The forced betrothal to a man older than her father, the beatings when she refused, the convent as a prison disguised as sanctuary. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians understood psychosomatic illness. You certainly understand that sometimes the best medicine is simply being believed. You tell the abbess that Lady Marguerite suffers from a legitimate medical condition that requires rest, proper food, and absolutely no talk of marriage for at least a year. Whether the abbess believes you or simply chooses to play along, she agrees. You leave the convent as darkness falls, feeling both satisfied and drained. Lady Marguerite is sitting up, taking small sips of honey-sweetened wine. Her possession miraculously cured by the radical treatment of someone actually listening to her. The abbess slipped you an extra gold coin with a knowing look that suggested she understood exactly what kind of medicine you'd practiced. Sometimes the best physicians know when not to be physicians at all. The university district comes alive at night in ways that would scandalize the good citizens who lock themselves behind sturdy doors after dark. Students spill from taverns, arguing about Aristotle with the passionate intensity only achieved through youth and cheap wine. You're heading for the medical college's monthly dissection, a semi-legal affair that requires equal parts scientific curiosity and strong stomach. The anatomy theatre is tucked behind St. Jerome's Church, in what used to be a grain warehouse before the medical faculty convinced the bishop that cutting up bodies was essential for understanding God's creation. The convince part involved substantial donations and promises that only executed criminals and unclaimed paupers would grace the dissection table. Tonight's specimen, you've heard, has an interesting provenance. You descend into the circular chamber where tiered benches already hold 24 physicians and advanced students. The air reeks of vinegar and rosemary, futile attempts to mask the smell of death. On the central table lies a corpse covered by a sheet, and standing beside it is Master Pietro from Bologna, the university's star anatomist and your former rival from student days. Ah, our esteemed colleague arrives, Pietro announces with a kind of smile that suggests he's sharpened his knives extra carefully. Just in time for tonight's special demonstration, he whips off the sheet with theatrical flair, revealing the corpse beneath. Your breath catches. You know that face, or rather, knew it. It's Master Cornelius, the physician who accused you of charlatanry last year and tried to have your license revoked. The room buzzes with whispers. Cornelius died 3 days ago, supposedly of apoplexy, but everyone knows he had more enemies than a tax collector, his widow. Rather than pay for a proper burial, sold his body to the university for dissection, the ultimate posthumous insult in a world that believes bodily resurrection requires all your original parts. Colleagues, Pietro continues, clearly relishing the moment. Tonight, we explore not just anatomy, but the mysteries of sudden death. Observe the unusual discoloration around the lips. He begins the formal dissection, narrating in Latin for the official record while making cuts with practiced precision. Medieval dissections followed strict protocols. The professor lectured while a surgeon cut and a demonstrator pointed out structures. But tonight feels different. There's an edge to Pietro's commentary that suggests he's looking for something specific. You lean forward as he opens the chest cavity, and that's when you see it. The heart is all wrong. Where there should be healthy muscle, there's a strange mottling, almost like poison, someone whispers, and the word spreads through the amphitheatre like wildfire. Pietro nods grimly. Specifically, mercury. See the metallic deposits in the liver tissue. Here's something historians often miss. Medieval physicians were surprisingly good at recognizing poisoning during autopsy. They couldn't run toxicology screens, but they knew the visual signs. Mercury left silvery traces. Arsenic caused specific organ damage. Hemlock left the peculiar smile of muscle paralysis. The knowledge came from centuries of political murders disguised as natural deaths. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. If Cornelius was murdered, who did it? His wife, tired of his philandering. A rival physician whose secrets he threatened to expose. One of his patients, seeking revenge for a loved one killed by his incompetence. The dissection has suddenly become an investigation, and everyone in the room is potentially suspect, including you, given your very public feud with the deceased. Pietro continues cutting, each revelation more damning than the last. The stomach contains partially digested material that, when tested with a hot knife, releases the telltale sweet smell of mercury-laced wine. The kidneys show signs of acute failure, but it's when he reaches the brain that things get truly bizarre. There, pressed against the inside of the skull, is a small roll of parchment. The room goes silent as Pietro carefully extracts the paper. It's a medical formula, Cornelius's secret recipe for a universal panacea he claimed could cure any disease. The same formula he'd refused to share with the medical college, claiming it was too powerful for ordinary physicians. Now, in death, his greatest secret is literally spilling from his opened skull. Medieval medicine meets medieval justice in the most macabre way possible. The parchment passes from hand to hand like a holy relic or a cursed artifact. Nobody's quite sure which. You recognize Cornelius's cramped handwriting, but the formula itself is a bewildering mix of alchemical symbols, astrological calculations, and ingredients that range from mundane, willow bark, honey, to exotic, powdered sapphire, virgin's tears collected under a full moon, to downright disturbing, the stone found in a hanged man's gallbladder. Pietro carefully copies it into the official record while the room erupts in heated debate. Clearly murdered for this secret, one physician declares, but by whom? His own formula killed him. Another counters. Mercury is the third ingredient. Perhaps he tested it on himself? You're about to add your own theory when the door bangs open. The night watch enters, followed by none other than Master Solomon the Jew, Rabbi Miriam of the Women's Medical School, and most surprisingly, Sister Hildegard from the cathedral's infirmary. It's an unprecedented gathering. Christian physicians, a Jewish doctor, a female healer, and a medical nun all in the same room. Usually, professional rivalry and religious segregation keep these groups apart like oil and water. "We need to talk," Solomon announces, his usually calm demeanor cracked with urgency. "All of us, together." He glances at the eviscerated Cornelius, about him, and about what's coming. What follows is perhaps the strangest dinner party in medical history. Pietro hastily covers Cornelius. No one wants to eat while staring at exposed organs, and sends his students to raid the university kitchens. Soon, the anatomy theatre transforms into an impromptu feast, with bread, cheese, and wine shared among people who normally cross the street to avoid each other. The reason for this unprecedented cooperation becomes clear as Solomon speaks. 3 physicians dead in 3 cities this month, all poisoned, all carrying similar formulas. He produces 2 more parchments, each containing variations of Cornelius's universal panacea. Someone is hunting us, someone who believes we possess dangerous knowledge. Rabbi Miriam nods, her ancient face grave beneath her head covering. Despite laws forbidding women from practicing medicine, she's been healing people for 40 years, and everyone pretends not to know. My cousin in Prague wrote of similar deaths, physicians found with mercury in their bellies and formulas in their bodies, as if someone is collecting our secrets by force. Here's where medieval medical politics gets truly complex. Different traditions guarded their knowledge jealously. Christian physicians had their Galenic texts and astrological charts. Jewish doctors possessed Arabic translations of Greek works lost to the West. Female healers maintained oral traditions of herbcraft passed mother to daughter. The monasteries hoarded their own pharmaceutical recipes. And somewhere in the shadows, alchemists pursued the philosopher's stone and elixir of life. Now someone was apparently trying to gather all these secrets through murder. Sister Hildegard, who you've always dismissed as a simple herb woman, reveals unexpected depths. The formula isn't complete, she states, examining Cornelius's parchment with expert eyes. See here, the proportions are deliberately wrong. Each of us carries part of the true recipe, passed down through our traditions, separately. They're dangerous but incomplete. Together, she trails off. But the implication is clear. The wine flows more freely as the night deepens and professional barriers crumble. Pietro admits his grandmother was a strega, a wise woman, who taught him bone setting before he learned Latin. Solomon shares techniques from Maimonides that would revolutionize Christian surgery if prejudice didn't prevent their adoption. You find yourself discussing the psychological aspects of healing with Rabbi Miriam, who's been treating what she calls sorrows of the soul long before anyone coined terms for mental illness. But it's the comedy of the evening that truly stands out. Master Ambrose, arriving late and already drunk, mistakes the covered corpse for a sleeping colleague and tries to wake him to share his latest alchemical discovery. The scream when he lifts the sheet and finds himself face to face with Cornelius's open chest cavity sobers him instantly. Then there's the moment when everyone realizes they're technically committing heresy by sharing medical knowledge across religious lines, leading to a hasty mock conversion ceremony where everyone temporarily converts to each other's faiths for the duration of dinner. The night's strangest revelation comes from the youngest among you, Pietro's student Marcus, who's been quietly comparing all the formulas. Masters, he says hesitantly, what if there is no assassin? What if the formula itself is cursed? Each victim had mercury in the recipe. Each tested it on themselves. Perhaps the secret knowledge we guard so jealously is simply wrong. The silence that follows is deafening. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians killed more patients than they cured, but you rarely consider that possibility. What if your carefully guarded secrets, your precious formulas passed down through generations, are just elaborate ways to poison yourself? The philosophical crisis might have continued all night, but the cathedral bells tolling matins remind you of a more pressing obligation. Lord Reginald's mistress, the raven-haired Beatrice who shares his bed, but not his public life, sent word earlier requesting your discreet attention for a delicate matter. These midnight consultations pay triple your usual rate, not for the medicine, but for the silence. You bid farewell to your unlikely dinner companions, each departing into the night with new knowledge and fresh paranoia about their own secret formulas. The castle at night is a different beast than during daylight hours. You enter through the postern gate, where a guard who's definitely not supposed to know about these visits doesn't see you pass. The climb to Beatrice's chambers, strategically located in the tower farthest from Lord Reginald's own rooms, requires navigating corridors lit only by dying torches and your own familiarity with the route. You've made this journey 6 times before, always for women's troubles that require utmost discretion. Beatrice receives you in a silk robe that costs more than most peasants see in a lifetime. She's beautiful in that calculated way of successful mistresses, not young anymore, but maintaining the illusion through careful grooming and expensive unguents. Her chamber smells of rosewater and something else, something medicinal that makes your physician's instincts prickle. "Thank you for coming," she says, gesturing to a cushioned chair. "Wine?" You accept, though you note she doesn't drink from her own cup. "I need your expertise on a delicate matter." She produces a small vial filled with clear liquid. "Can you identify this?" You uncork it carefully, wafting the fumes toward your nose rather than sniffing directly, a habit that saved more than one physician from poisoning. The scent is bitter almonds mixed with something floral. Your blood runs cold. "Where did you get this?" "I found it among Lord Reginald's possessions," she says, watching your face carefully, hidden in a false bottom of his writing desk, along with this. She hands you a letter, and though you shouldn't be surprised after tonight's revelations, you are. It's another formula, similar to Cornelius's but with crucial differences, and it's in Lord Reginald's hand. Here's what mainstream history often misses. Medieval nobles were just as obsessed with life extension as their physicians. They funded alchemical research, collected medical secrets, and sometimes decided to cut out the middleman and experiment themselves. Lord Reginald, it seems, has been pursuing his own version of the universal panacea. The clear liquid, a concentrated mercury solution, sweet enough to mask the poison, deadly enough to kill within days. He's been taking it, Beatrice continues, her voice steady despite the implications. Small doses each morning. He believes it's making him younger, stronger. He wants me to start taking it too. Says it will preserve my beauty. The bitter laugh that follows tells you everything about her feelings on that subject. This puts you in an impossible position. Your astronomical charts this morning showed Lord Reginald's death approaching, but you assumed it would be gout or apoplexy, not self-administered mercury poisoning. If you tell him the truth, he might not believe you. If you don't, he'll die. And either way, Beatrice is now involved, making you complicit in whatever happens next. "What do you want me to do?" you ask, though you suspect you already know. "Switch it," she says simply. "Replace the poison with something harmless. Let him think he's taking his elixir while actually saving his life. He'll never know." She leans forward, and suddenly the calculated mistress facade drops. "I may warm his bed for gold, but I don't want his death on my conscience. Even bastards deserve better than dying from their own stupidity." The request should horrify you. It's deception, potentially treason, definitely against your medical oaths. But after tonight, after seeing Cornelia split open like a feast day goose, after learning about the murdered physicians, after realizing how much of your profession is built on potentially lethal ignorance, you find yourself nodding. Sometimes the best medicine is preventing patients from taking medicine at all. You work quickly, mixing a harmless substitute from Beatrice's cosmetics. Rosewater, a touch of bitter herbs for authenticity, a few drops of oil to match the consistency. It won't cure anything, but it won't kill either. As you transfer it to Lord Reginald's vial, Beatrice shares more disturbing news. The mistress's network, yes, that's a real thing, has reported similar discoveries. Lords across the region are experimenting with these formulas, convinced they've found secrets their physicians selfishly withhold. The midnight consultation ends with an agreement. You'll return monthly to maintain the deception, ensuring Lord Reginald's elixir remains harmless. Beatrice will spread word through her network to check their own lord's secret stashes. It's a conspiracy of mercy, saving powerful men from their own ambitions. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians were heroes or charlatans. Tonight, you're both. A fraud preventing a greater tragedy. You stumble from the castle as the first grey hints of dawn creep over the city walls. Your head pounds from wine, revelations, and the growing certainty that medieval medicine might be equal parts healing art and elaborate death cult. The streets are still dark, but already the earliest risers are stirring. Bakers firing their ovens, monks shuffling to lords, and night soil men finishing their fragrant rounds. You need to get home, catch an hour's sleep, and pretend today is just another normal day of potentially killing patients with good intentions. But the universe, it seems, has other plans. A scream pierces the pre-dawn quiet, not the ordinary shriek of domestic violence or drunken brawling, but the special pitch reserved for true terror. It's coming from the poorest quarter, where the tanners and dyers cluster along the fetid river. Your physician's oath means you can't ignore it, though every exhausted bone in your body wants to pretend you're suddenly deaf. You round the corner to find a scene from a morality play staged in hell. 3 houses show the dreaded red crosses painted on their doors, the universal sign of plague. But it's the crowd gathered in the narrow street that makes your blood freeze. They're backing away from a figure stumbling out of one marked house. And even in the dim light, you can see why. The man's face is a mass of black boils, his fingers already showing the necrosis that gives the Black Death its name. He's in the final stages, probably hours from death, but still walking, still spreading contagion with every breath. Physician! Someone spots your robes. Do something. The crowd parts, pushing you forward while simultaneously backing away. It's a neat trick, honoring your authority while volunteering you for probable death. You're exhausted, slightly drunk, and running on the fumes of a night that included beetle incidents, demonic possession, corpse dissection, and noble mistress conspiracies. This is exactly the wrong time to face a plague outbreak. But here you are, the only medical authority in sight, expected to somehow stop death incarnate from spreading through the slums. The plagued man focuses on you with eyes that burn with fever. "Help me," he croaks, reaching out with hands that look like they're wearing black gloves. Every instinct screams at you to run. Your university training offers nothing useful. Galen never covered what to do when the Black Death walks toward you at dawn. But something else takes over. Maybe professional pride or simple human stupidity. You step forward. "Stop," you command, with more authority than you feel. "Everyone back. You there. Bring fire, torches, braziers, anything that burns." If bad air causes plague, maybe good smoke can fight it. It's terrible logic, but it gives people something to do besides panic. And vinegar. Soak cloths in vinegar for your faces. Again, probably useless, but busy people don't riot. Here's what historians know that you don't. The plague spreads through flea bites and respiratory droplets. Your vinegar masks might actually help a tiny bit with the latter. The fires will do nothing except make everyone smell like a barbecue. But the real effectiveness comes from crowd control, getting people organized, separated, thinking about something besides their terror. The dying man collapses before reaching you, which solves one immediate problem. You approach carefully, knowing you're probably signing your own death warrant. But when you kneel beside him, you notice something odd. Yes, he has plague. The buboes and blackened extremities are unmistakable. But there's something else. A sweet smell on his breath that has nothing to do with disease. Mercury. Because of course there is. Even dying of plague. He'd been trying to cure himself with poison. More screams from other houses. More red crosses appearing as if by malign magic. The outbreak isn't starting. It's been building while the city slept. You stand. Decision made. "Seal the quarter," you shout. "No one in or out. Bring the sick to the old tannery warehouse. Keep them separate from the healthy. It's harsh, but it might save the rest of the city." And someone wake the other physicians, all of them. Tell them the dance begins again. The dance is what you call plague outbreaks, death as a dancing master. Teaching steps everyone must learn. You've survived 2 previous outbreaks. Those survived might be generous. More accurate to say you haven't died yet. The gathered crowd looks at you with a mixture of hope and resignation. You're their physician, their educated healer, their bulwark against death. If only they knew you'd spent the night learning that most medical knowledge might be elaborate fiction. A child appears at your elbow, the same servant boy from this morning who summoned you to Aldrich's house. "Sir," he pants. The merchant sends word. His fever has broken. The swellings reduce. He credits your treatment and sends this. He presses a heavy purse into your hands. So Aldrich survived, either because of your treatment or despite it. One life saved while dozens die around you. Medieval medicine in a nutshell. Random successes amid systematic failure. The old tannery warehouse transforms into a vision of purgatory as the sun rises fully. You've managed perhaps 20 minutes of fitful sleep propped against a wall before the stream of sick becomes a flood. Guillaume arrives with his surgical tools, takes one look at the situation, and immediately starts organizing triage. Pietro brings his students, turning medical education into trial by plague. Even Master Ambrose appears, mercifully sober and carrying enough experimental remedies to either cure the outbreak or create entirely new diseases. By midday, you have 43 confirmed plague cases and twice that number claiming symptoms that range from legitimate to laughably hypochondriac. One woman insists she has plague because her neighbor's cat looked at her strangely. A baker claims his bread turned black overnight, a sure sign of corruption, though you suspect poor quality flour. The actual plague victims are easier to diagnose. The characteristic buboes, the fever, the peculiar sweet smell of approaching death. You're examining a child, no more than 7, already showing the dreaded tokens, when exhaustion finally overwhelms you. The room spins, your vision blurs, and for one terrifying moment you think you've contracted plague yourself. But no, it's simple fatigue compounded by wine, stress, and the growing certainty that you're fighting death with the medical equivalent of children's toys. You sink onto a bench, head in your hands, and do something no physician should do in front of patients. You show weakness. "Can't do this," you mutter, words slipping out like blood from a poorly bandaged wound. "Can't save them. Don't even know what I'm doing. Mercury, leeches, star charts, it's all madness. We're killing them with our cures, and the ones who survive do so despite us, not because of us." The confession hangs in the air like incense at a funeral. Your students stare. Patients who can still focus look horrified. You've just committed professional suicide, admitting that the emperor of medicine wears no clothes. But instead of condemnation, something unexpected happens. Guillaume sits beside you, his usually mocking face serious. "You think I don't know that," he says quietly. "You think any of us don't know? But what's the alternative? Let them die without trying. At least we're here. At least we care enough to risk our own lives." He's right. And somehow that makes it worse. Medieval medicine, the art of caring without curing, of compassion without competence. The rest of the day blurs into a fever dream of desperate treatments and small victories. You bleed some patients, not because you believe it helps, but because they expect it. You apply poultices that smell impressive and do nothing. You calculate astrological charts that are mathematical nonsense but provide comfort. And occasionally, just occasionally, someone improves. Their fever breaks. Their buboes drain. They sit up and ask for water. Whether it's your treatment, their constitution, or blind luck, you'll never know. As darkness falls again, you're attempting to document the day's cases by candlelight. Your usual meticulous records have devolved into barely legible scrawls. Patient names blur together. Symptoms repeat like a medical mantra. Fever, buboes, blackened fingers, death. Your hand cramps around the quill, and ink splatters across the page like blood spatter. Fitting, really. That's when you notice your own handwriting changing. The letters waver, growing larger, then smaller, slanting wildly. You're writing words that make no sense. The dancing master comes with mercury wings, and stars fall into the mouths of the dying. Either you're having a mystical revelation, or the wine, exhaustion, and constant exposure to death have finally broken something inside your physician's mind. Master Solomon appears at your shoulder, reading your deranged notes without comment. "Go home," he says gently. "You're no good to anyone like this." But you can't stop writing. The words pour out like pus from a lanced boil, all your fears, doubts, and growing certainty that medieval medicine is an elaborate performance where everyone knows the play is fiction, but performs anyway, because the alternative is admitting helplessness. "We're frauds," you write, the words large and jagged. Educated frauds with Latin and stars, but frauds nonetheless. We promise healing and deliver death dressed in fancy robes. The barber surgeons at least admit they're butchers. We pretend to be philosophers while poisoning our patients with mercury and false hope. Solomon reads over your shoulder, then quietly takes the quill from your cramping fingers. "Yes," he says simply, "we are frauds, but we're the best frauds they have. Tomorrow you'll wake, wash the death from your hands, and pretend again, because that's what physicians do. We carry the burden of knowledge, not medical knowledge, but the knowledge that we know nothing, and we heal anyway, or at least try to comfort those we cannot heal." The candle has burned down to a stub by the time you finally close your ledger. The tannery warehouse has grown quiet, not the peaceful quiet of healing, but the exhausted silence that follows battle. Some patients sleep fitfully on straw pallets. Others have stopped moving altogether, their faces covered with rough cloth. Tomorrow, the death carts will come, and the dance will continue. But for now, there's just this moment of terrible stillness. You stumble from the warehouse into streets that feel alien after nearly 40 hours without proper sleep. Your physician's robe, once black and dignified, now bears stains from every bodily fluid the human body can produce. You smell like death, marinated in vinegar and despair. Your hands shake with exhaustion, and you're fairly certain you've started hallucinating because the shadows seem to be following you with unusual interest. The walk home takes 3 times longer than it should. You stop to vomit twice, whether from exhaustion, too much wine, or the first symptoms of plague. You neither know nor care. A stray dog follows you for a while, probably hoping you'll collapse and provide an easy meal. Even the animals know a dying thing when they see one, but somehow, impossibly, you reach your door. Inside, everything is exactly as you left it yesterday morning. Your urine flask still sits on the table, that morning sample now dark and settling. Your astronomical charts lie scattered where you dropped them after Lord Reginald's consultation. It feels like viewing artifacts from another lifetime, when you still believed in the power of planetary positions and bodily humours to explain the inexplicable. You collapse onto your bed without removing your befouled robes. Sleep should come instantly, but your mind won't stop churning. Faces parade through your memory. Aldrich with his buboes, Lady Marguerite with her convenient fits, Brutus the blacksmith speaking in tongues, Lord Reginald slowly poisoning himself with mercury. How many did you save? How many did you kill? Does it matter when the final tally is written? Here's what haunts you in these pre-dawn hours: the knowledge that you'll wake tomorrow and do it all again. Not because you believe in your treatments, but because the alternative is abandoning people to die without even the comfort of pretense. You're a fraud, but a necessary fraud. A merchant of false hope in a marketplace where false hope is the only currency that spends. You think about Cornelius, split open on the dissection table, his secret formula tucked inside his skull like a letter to future physicians. Was he warning them or mocking them? Did he know his universal panacea was just another poison? Or did he die believing? You'll never know. And perhaps that's mercy. Better to die with faith in your life's work than to recognize its futility. The sounds of the city waking filter through your shutters. Soon the bells will ring for prime, and your day will begin anew. Patients will arrive seeking miracles you cannot provide. You'll check their urine, chart their stars, balance their humors, and prescribe treatments that range from useless to actively harmful. But you'll do it with confidence, with compassion, and with the terrible knowledge that sometimes the performance of healing matters more than healing itself. As sleep finally claims you, one last thought surfaces. You survived another day as a medieval physician. Whether that's triumph or tragedy depends entirely on your perspective. Your patients trust you with their lives, not knowing that you're making it up as you go along. Guided by texts written by men who thought the heart was a furnace and the brain was for cooling blood. It's madness, but it's your madness, your calling, your burden. Tomorrow you'll wake. If plague or exhaustion doesn't claim you in the night, you'll check your urine, say your prayers, and venture once more into a world where death lurks around every corner, and your best weapon against it is educated guesswork dressed in Latin terminology. You'll be a fraud, a charlatan, a merchant of false hope, but you'll also be the only thing standing between your patients and the abyss. That's medieval medicine. Not a science, but a faith. Not knowledge, but conviction. Not healing, but the promise of healing. And somehow, impossibly, occasionally, it actually works. Whether through skill, luck, or divine intervention. Some patients survive. They credit your treatments, your wisdom, your mystical understanding of the cosmos. You let them believe it because their belief might be the most powerful medicine you possess. The last candle gutters out, plunging your chamber into darkness. In a few hours, the cock will crow, and the cycle will begin anew. But for now, blessed unconsciousness claims you. In your dreams, you're not a fraud, but a true healer, wielding knowledge that actually cures rather than kills. It's a beautiful dream, and one that will sustain you through another day of beautiful, terrible, necessary lies. Medieval medicine, where the cure is often worse than the disease, but the alternative, abandoning hope entirely, is the worst disease of all. You survive today, God willing, you'll survive tomorrow, and that, perhaps, is the greatest miracle your profession can offer. As you sink deeper into sleep, the harsh realities of your day begin to fade like morning mist over the Thames. Your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of a city that never truly sleeps, but sometimes dozes between catastrophes. The physician's burden lifts from your shoulders, if only for these precious hours before dawn. In this quiet space between today's failures and tomorrow's uncertainties, a strange peace settles over you. Yes, you practice medicine with tools barely better than superstition. Yes, you may have killed as many as you cured, but you showed up. In a world where death comes swift and arbitrary, You stood between the darkness and the dying, armed with little more than conviction and compassion. The sounds of night, distant church bells, the cry of the watch, the scurrying of rats that carry tomorrow's plague, become a lullaby. Your last conscious thought is neither of medical triumph nor failure, but of simple human endurance. Tomorrow you'll rise again, don the robes of authority you barely deserve, and practice an art you barely understand. But tonight, finally, you rest. Sleep well. Medieval physician, you've earned these few hours of peace. Let the stars wheel overhead without your calculations. Let the humours flow unbalanced. Let the sick wait for morning. For now, in this gentle darkness, you're not a fraud or a hero, but simply a tired human who did their best in an impossible profession. The city settles around you like a blanket, and your breathing deepens into the rhythm of dreamless sleep. Whatever tomorrow brings, plague or peace, triumph or tragedy, will find you ready. But that's tomorrow's battle. Tonight, you've survived your day, and that's enough. Sweet dreams. Good doctor, may your sleep be untroubled by the weight of all you cannot cure.